generative artificial intelligence for Scrum Masters, Agile Delivery Leads, Agile Coaches, and really Agile project managers, anybody else who is involved with Agile ways of working and improving the way that we work within an Agile context. So hopefully that's why you're here. Looking forward to the conversation. Again, please throw any questions, comments, etc. in chat. If I can answer them real time, I will. If I can't, I'm happy to follow up with any of you on LinkedIn. And if it's something that's coming up from multiple individuals, or it seems like something that might be valuable to share more detail later, be happy to share that information on LinkedIn with everybody. So with that, thank you. So today's agenda, we've got an hour, so this is going to be tightly packed, but hopefully good and a lot of fun for everybody. We'll do a brief introduction on AI, including generative AI. Since we're all really advocates, proponents, and leaders in Agile ways of working, we're going to talk about aligning AI and Agile values. The thing in these sorts of sessions that's always compelling to me, and perhaps why some of you are here, I like to know in this period of time when I leave this session, what am I going to be able to do differently that I wasn't able to do before this started? So I'm going to spend the bulk of the time talking about some immediate applications for Scrum Masters, ADLs, Agile coaches, and others within Agile ways of working, things you can use immediately. With that, and I'd say sort of, I'm going to kill the vibe, but as we look at using the powerful tools that we're going to be sharing today, it's really important to also talk about the risks. So you use those tools thoughtfully. And we'll discuss that in just a little bit of detail so that you can be aware of some areas to be cognizant of as you start using these tools if you haven't started your journey yet. And then specifically moving forward, some suggested next steps from my perspective. So hopefully that resonates with all of you. And without any further ado, Noelle already introduced me, but this is always a chance for me to tell everyone that I like to play Scrabble, but I'm not particularly good at it. As Noelle said, I'm the VP of Consulting at LitheSpeed. But really, what I think is likely most valuable to all of you related to this conversation is most of my experience was not in consulting. Most of it has been in leading technology teams throughout all areas of the software development or product development lifecycle. 20 years or so of that has been in developing and delivering using Agile ways of working. So this content that I'll be sharing with you today is really things that I've already used in my day-to-day coaching and consulting work that I think you can find valuable as well. It's also informed, I spent 6 years leading product management and customer experience innovation for an AI and natural language processing platform a number of years ago. And that really helped me understand both the risk and the substantial rewards of using these tools. And I threw my LinkedIn information in the chat. Would love to connect with anyone to talk further. We'll only have a short amount of time today, so let's continue the conversation. So we'll start with a brief introduction to AI. What I like to say when we talk about really starting at the very beginning, what is AI? So the first thing is when we think about Agile ways of working, I think there's a really good analog. You know, Agile is an umbrella term from my perspective, and you've got things underneath that, different frameworks, different ways of working. You've got different approaches. The same way for AI. AI is a field, it's an umbrella, and those subfields include things like machine learning, natural language processing, and robotics. AI enables machine learning for decision-making, deep learning, and leverages neural networks, and that's really core to how a lot of these tools that we'll be talking about work today. It creates human-like, an emphasis to me on that hyphen-like piece. It's trying to emulate humanity or emulate human qualities through the way that it works, but it creates intelligent systems that do a lot of things that humans can do today. And I think part of the big reason why it's grown so rapidly is the amount of data that we have available has also grown exponentially. AI needs data and learns from it using algorithms. Generative AI, and part of the reason for starting with the umbrella and then zooming in a little bit is a number of folks seem to conflate AI with generative AI, and generative AI is what a lot of us think about today when we're talking about AI. But generative AI, or Gen AI for short, is generative artificial intelligence. It's that subset that focuses on creating or generating, hence the gen, data and content. Its responses can mimic human-like creativity and ingenuity. And where traditional AI systems primarily work with predefined rules and patterns, part of where generative AI has become so compelling is that it has the capacity to produce new and original information, things including text, images, and music. So there's a reason for the excitement. There's a lot of hype there, but there's also a lot of value with Gen AI. So AI and agile values, how do we align those two critical things together? And I think this is key, especially as this industry has become so emergent and sort of the focus of so many businesses and individuals in every way. We need to be very thoughtful as those who are proponents of agile ways of working, but also agile values, that what we use AI for and how we use it aligns to agile ways of working. And like I often say, like money, it's neither good nor bad. It depends on what you spend it on. AI is neither good nor bad related to agile ways of working, depending on how you apply it. So some ways that I would suggest we think about aligning AI and agile values. Let's true back to our manifesto. So the idea of individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So the more that we can use AI tools to help with communication and collaboration through things like chatbots, that will help us with our interactions. It doesn't replace them. It helps them so that we can really focus on higher quality, higher frequency, higher value interactions. And that's really important. Working solutions over comprehensive documentation, again, truing back to the manifesto. So in a lot of industries, in most real world worlds, we have to provide documentation, sometimes for compliance, for a variety of different reasons. AI tools can help us generate the documentation that we need and make sure that it's useful and usable and of high quality. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So the better that we have an understanding of how we're working with customers, the more that we can adapt what we're doing in terms of our products, our solutions, how we work together with them. And AI can help with analytics to provide insights and to help us really focus less on what the contract says, but really about how we can, as I say often, aggressively collaborate. And related to that, responding to change over following a plan. So the more that we have real-time data and insights from these tools, the more that we can use these tools to help understand where there are likely areas where there are changes in behavior or market trends, et cetera. This allows us to very rapidly and effectively and with a low amount of friction change what our plans are. So these are some real ways that we can start using these tools today, again, to amplify and enhance and make more efficient our agile ways of working, aligned to those values. So we really can spend the time that we gain from using these tools to better have those human interactions, the ones that machines can't ever really replace. And that to me is the real high value of these things. They allow more time for us to truly interact on a human to human. So what can generative AI do for my team and the team work? So here are some real world use cases or scenarios. The screen caps that you'll see here are all from ChatGPT 3.5. And they likely would be even a little bit improved with 4.0. But it's a really good way to see in the real world how these tools are responding to these areas where we as proponents and advocates and leaders in agile ways of working can help the day-to-day that we do. So I started with user stories, and that's an area where a lot of the coaching and consulting and training that I do, folks really struggle with creating user stories and ones that are really useful and usable and really understanding. So I took, in this example, I copied and pasted into ChatGPT a number of stories that I had just as I would like to, so that in that format, and asked it to help me to refine those stories. So if I want to really make sure that I understand users' needs and goals, that can really be a problem for anybody, even on mature teams. But where I've seen this most pronounced is for new teams, new product owners, or those who are new to agile ways of working. So as organizations go through transformations, teams that I've had, I'm sure a number of teams that you all have been working with in terms of transformational work, this is really a challenge, especially if you're just getting started. Gen AI can help us both with the creation and refinement of stories. So in this instance, I had some stories to start with. In your instance, you may just have some general user needs, or you may just even have an industry or a particular product. Start with what you've got, with the data that you have, and start there to iterate and either generate or refine those user stories. In this example, I just pasted those stories and asked for them to be refined. So it did a good job at making those stories better. Um, it provided a summary of what those refinements would be. And as you can see, it explained what they are, and it also added a label to them for clarity. So not just as a I'd like to so that, but actually being able to provide a good label or title for that will also help with shared understanding in language that everybody on the team and our business collaborators, our business partners, our product owner, et cetera, that they also would understand. So part of the theme, if you haven't started using these tools or haven't used them substantially yet, the true value to me is not in the question answer pair. It's that ongoing interaction. So if I was talking with one of you, I'm looking at Marcos on my screen. Marcos shows up to a number of these events. I'm going to call on Marcos. I hope that's okay. Marcos is an expert in agile ways of working. I would love to pick Marcos's brain if I was trying to refine some user stories. I don't have access to Marcos, but this is a way for me to interact with somebody or a simulation of somebody who has some of that expertise, maybe not at Marcos's level, but who is able to, we can work back and forth conversation. I wouldn't just say, hey, Marcos, could you help me with this story? We would talk back and forth, and Marcos would probably give me some ideas or he'd ask me some questions. We would keep refining those things and use that same idea when you're interacting with these tools. It keeps the prior interactions context so that when I ask my next question, it knows what's been provided so far. And that's really one of the key values that I see in these tools is it's not just an ask and answer, it's an ongoing dialogue that continues to evolve and refine. And for those of us who believe in continuous improvement and iterative incremental improvement, that binds very well to that. So I've also found in a lot of the work that I've done, and you know, some of you, probably all of you, I think have run into this with teams that you've coached, especially new teams or teams that are new to agile ways of working or maybe have some challenges. A lot of agile events, especially for Scrum teams that have been doing Scrum either well or in many cases not so well over time, these events, these ceremonies, that's just checking a box. Those events can be routine, boring, and ineffective. We need these ceremonies, these events to be effective. And part of that is that they need often some variety. So in my example here, I said, provide new approaches for sprint planning. Using these tools gives me a broad palette of opportunities that I can look at in terms of ideation. That's one of the great values of these tools. If I want to try something new and different, I can try to do that from scratch, but why not start with these tools and they will have some great suggestions on things that I can do. Find one and ideate in terms of these suggestions. So in this particular example, I asked for those approaches to sprint planning. It came up with story mapping, jobs to be done, Kanban stop backlogs, WSGIF, et cetera. Whether all of these make sense to me in my context or not, we'd have to really look at them, but at least I'm getting some ideas to prime that pump in terms of what I might want to do. So I'm familiar with WSGIF. Others may or may not be. But in terms of using it for planning at sprint planning, I thought that was interesting. So I said, well, WSGIF intrigued me. I'd like to understand a little bit more. So again, that context really matters. So I said, provide a starter's guide for using WSGIF in planning. With that, it provides a practical summary with actions, define those components, including, WSGIF is cost of delay, divided job size, what cost of delay is made up of, how we measure job size, et cetera. So this is very much if you're not familiar with or only have a superficial understanding of WSGIF, this is a great way to get started. That level of expertise, I say starter's guide, it gives me a very entry-level guide. So I'm pretty well acquainted with WSGIF, and I bet a lot of you who are here today are at least as familiar with me, maybe even more so. So what if I want to know more about that, but I want to know about it from an expert perspective about how I would use it in this context? So same context, but now I say provide an expert guide for using WSGIF in planning. Everything else about the context is the same except that one word, but that one word is very meaningful in this context. So if you can see in its initial response, it provides a different level of explanation in summary. And then the items that are enumerated below, it goes into far more detail and focus because it now understands that I'm in this context. My persona is that of an expert. I don't need you to dumb it down and to explain WSGIF as if I had never been acquainted with that term before, but it gives me very specific guidance for an expert level of how I would use this in planning. That context is the same, but the response is considerably different. So always think about audience if you want good responses and if you want high quality outputs from your inputs. So here's another area where I think a lot of us who are in agile ways of working, who are true advocates not only of the practices, but the values and the principles, we can't overstate the importance of a good retrospective and taking action on that. So I asked, how can you help me as the leader of this session, this facilitating this, whether I'm a coach, a scrum master, whatever my role may be. My last retrospective didn't go well, but I provide some more detail here, and that's really important. People didn't talk, and we didn't come up with things to improve. What can I do for the next one? If I had not put the didn't talk, didn't come up with things to improve, if I just said it didn't go well, I'm going to get a very broad answer. But since I provided some additional context there, it really provided some suggestions that were very unique to my particular scenario. Why didn't it go well? So when you're thinking about using these tools, the more specificity you provide about your context, the more tuned the response is going to be targeted towards that specific need. And if you can look here, it said suggest the following strategies, including pre-retro communication and setting the right environment. And those are areas where I see a lot of folks struggle. They put it on the calendar because the Scrum Guide saith that thou shalt. This is a key ceremony in Scrum. I've got it on the calendar, but maybe I don't know if I'm new to this, what I need to do to set the right foundation for a good conversation, including communicating in advance and then making sure that the environment is psychologically safe. So that context really helped me. I still have that context though. Again, I'm chaining these things together, and I find a lot of the work that we do has a lot of connective tissue. And so the more that I can continue that conversation, I think the more valuable it is and the more efficient you can be with how you interact with these tools. So in this instance, subsequent prompts can help with actions. I've got this new approach. We just talked about that. I'm going to change how I do the retro. But I'm also going to change how I communicate about the retro. I'm going to put an agenda in there. And this may not sound super agile, but to me, there's nothing more agile than good communication and shared understanding. So I'm a big advocate of meeting invites, even for recurring events that have a specific agenda and that have a clear goal. This allows me with this tool. Again, I'm continuing with the context, create an agenda for the retro, summarizing the above. So that context that you just saw that I can share with the team and management. So I've now got my structured agenda. So now as part of its first suggestion, if you recall from the prior slide, communicate in advance how we're going to have this retrospective, how it works. It built an agenda for me with all of the information that I need. Obviously, I have to update those variables. But what a great way, especially if your organization, and a lot of them from my observation, are not necessarily good at this and consistently providing an explicit and specific agenda. It built that for me, including based on the data that it has some pretty good initial ideas on the duration of these particular activities. So could I have done this from scratch? Yeah. Could I have done it in the 30 seconds that it took to generate? No. So these are these areas where it can really help, even if you know how to do this. And I'm sure you all do. Even if you could do this on your own, how much time does this save you? And if this saves you 15 to 30 minutes over time, those 15 to 30 minutes add up to a lot of time that you can be spending working with other people, doing things again that really require human to human interaction. And that to me really is the superpower of these tools, that they allow us to spend time on the truly human interactions. So here's the last example that I'll share today. And this one blew me away. This is, I think I did this 3-4 months ago or so. But I really found it compelling. And I hope that this or a variation of this for each of you in your day to day, you also could find incredibly valuable. So I was not surprised that this tool, this is again ChatGPT, but you will get similar results and you can use similar inputs with any tool of your choice, Gemini, Copilot, Perplexity, Claude, etc. I try to use a number of different tools to just sort of compare and contrast. But in any of them, I copied and pasted a Jira export. So I just dumped Jira out to a CSV and I just copied that data and I plopped it in. From that, I pasted it into the ChatGPT input. You can also upload them if you have them in CSV or other. It can read a lot of file formats, CSV, PDF, Excel, etc. So the part that was not super surprising to me was that it did a really good job of analyzing the data. So to me, more powerful than most of our business intelligence type tools. Those tools, if you tell it what to look for, it'll tell you, the Power BI and related tools. They'll aggregate your data and slice it and dice it in whatever way that you'd like. But it generally, at least from my experience, those tools don't have contextual understanding of what that data means. So in terms of things like on item 2, it looks at enumerated value 2. It looks at things like the labels. And we'll see why that's important in just a moment. Things like sprint, things like story point estimates. So one of the standard tools will aggregate that. It can tell you, slice and dice, how many story points you have, what's your standard deviation between a 1 and a 20 or whatever the case may be. But will it tell you moderate level of complexity or effort required? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But those trends were things that you could find similar outputs from any business intelligence type visualization tool. But here was the part that I thought was really interesting. And it did this, by the way, with ChatGPT without me explicitly asking for it. I asked it to find trends. It suggested after it followed the trends, I didn't ask it to give me specific. I said, find trends in the data for improving the sprint. I didn't ask it specifically to provide those specific ways to address those trends. And it was nice that it implicitly understood, as a good human consultant or partner would say, you're asking me to find trends, but what you're implicitly asking me is, what can I do about areas that I need to improve? It took that step by itself. And so it looked at the data. And again, here's where that contextual understanding of the data, to me, at least to me, was really, it blew me away in a very positive way. It looked at items in the unresolved issues, but if you look at them, it understood that those related to critical system crashes and hardware problems were ones that I should prioritize because of the user experience. Unless you specifically program your analytics tool to have that connective tissue. I've never seen that in such a way. It did that without any further guidance. Resource allocation, again, it understood what story points were. It understood the level of complexity implicitly. And also, again, back to the hardware and driver related issues. That was amazing to me, that it connected the dots about the complexity, but also the need for specific skills based on particular types of issues. It was able to infer that from the items that were just basically in the JIRA descriptions. As I mentioned before, it aggregated and analyzed the data as far as the labels and talked about scalability and proactive and how those might be related to system performance. I won't read all of this, but it provided all of that to me. And some of those things were, I think I had a couple hundred rows worth of records from Jira. Those were things, some of them, there were things that I knew, but the ideas here I thought were great. So this to me was just an amazing way in 30 seconds or whatever it took to actually generate the output to look at my data for my team and put some tangible, not ethereal, uh, not amorphous, but really specific, tactical, focused areas that I could do and address the issues to make sure that I was improving as a team. That was just amazing to me. And I hope that if you haven't used these tools for something like this before, this might be one that you could find really valuable if you're struggling with understanding as a team how to improve what the team is doing and having some great suggestions. Just again, as if I was talking to my friend Marcos to get some wisdom from him about, hey, we looked at this data, what we do. Marcos may well come up with that, looking at that same data set and say, hey, John, I looked at these and these are some areas where I think you really can improve based on the data that I've seen. I think that was really, really, really valuable. And I hope you found that valuable as well. So those are some real world examples of things that I find useful and that have immediate application. There's some other areas, and many of you may have some other things that you've observed or read about as well. There's so much that's happening in the space. It's mind-boggling just trying to keep up. But let's talk about first rewards, and then we'll talk about risks. I am very much a pragmatist. I like the idea of technology used for real-world problems that I can wrap my head around. I roll my eyes sometimes when I see a lot of the hyperbolic posts that on LinkedIn and elsewhere about AI and seeing it being added to every product that everyone has. There's AI fatigue, I think, is a new term that I've been seeing in a number of articles lately. But past the hype, who's using it today? So if you're familiar with IntelliCode, Microsoft's tool as far as software development, it uses AI to provide code suggestions in real time. Real world solution. This helps us develop. It helps developers write better quality code more quickly. It's like pair programming real time. Bug prediction. So Facebook uses a tool called Prophet, which is an AI forecasting tool. I don't know how it does this, but it's pretty exciting that you could predict bugs and performance issues before they occur. I assume that it looks at the code itself to really understand what's happening and if there are likely some issues with memory leaks or scalability or those sorts of things. But I thought that was awesome. Automated testing. This is an area that's really difficult to keep up in terms of generating and running use cases, especially generating good cases. So if we're working on new features or enhancements, we may need to add a lot of new regression tests to our automation suite. The more that we can automate those automated tests, the better, so that we can make changes more quickly and be comfortable that the app is still behaving as we wish it to with those quick changes. Natural language processing, close to my heart from my prior life, but using NLP for user stories. So Salesforce uses AI-driven analytics to analyze user stories to make sure that requirements are understandable and actionable. How many of us have seen user stories that come up in our Jira backlog when we're getting ready for refinement or for planning, and the stories don't make any sense, or they're incomplete, or they simply have a sentence fragment, and we're supposed to build based on that. So how great is it to have the ability to use these tools to help analyze those stories and make sure that they're ready for development when developers are ready to work on them? Predictive analytics for sprint planning. So Spotify uses data analytics and AI to predict sprint performance and help teams more than just looking at historical velocity, help teams set more accurate sprint goals and allocate resources more efficiently. So those are a couple of examples of these tools being used today by companies that I think all of us know and are familiar with the products. So this helps them with their ability to deliver more quickly and maintain a high level of quality. Some additional examples. So a lot of us use Slack. I'm sure many of you, excuse me, do as well. So Slack incorporates AI-powered chatbots to help with things like notifications, integrations, and automation. So again, if that's our communication tool, and agile communication and agile ways of working is incredibly paramount for high quality, effective, and efficient communication and collaboration. Chatbots can not replace that, but they'll really help with so much of that. Code generation, so additional to the Microsoft example, many of us use GitHub for our repo, and GitHub's Copilot assists developers in generating code. It will provide code snippets and context-aware suggestions while we're coding. So I think even better than what Microsoft, or at least more enhanced from what Microsoft is doing with IntelliCode, the Copilot, again, real time. We are pair programming. Just the individual with whom we're pairing is not an individual; it is a technology, but we still get that real time collaboration, which is awesome. I had referenced documentation as truing back to the manifesto earlier, and how we can use AI plugins for tools like Doxygen to automatically generate code documentation. So comments and descriptions can be generated while coding. So in some cases, documentation is something that we desire. In some cases, documentation is something that we are contractually or from a client compliance perspective or otherwise required to generate. For whatever reason we have to generate or choose to generate documentation, the more we can use tools like this, it not only will make it faster and less of our involvement, but again, with agile ways of working, we don't want documentation to get stale. And if we don't have tools like this, we're going to be spending a lot of our time just keeping up the documentation to make sure that it's accurate. If we're doing releases daily, how are we going to make sure our documentation is updated daily? So that's where these tools can really come in and be helpful. I have a generalized allergy to calling human beings resources. That said, in this context, in terms of how we are assigning team members to particular efforts, there's an example with TalentSoft. They use AI analytics for workforce planning. While I don't like using the term resource in this context, I do like the idea of using AI to help ensure that we, beyond just what's in somebody's resume, that we know the right skill sets that we have, what's needed for the work that we're going to be doing, and for upcoming projects or product work or initiatives or whatever else, based on the historical data we have. So these are instances, again, if you look at all of these from the two slides that I've shown, I'll go backwards just for a minute, these examples of code review automation, bug prediction, automated testing, our user story improvement, improving our sprint planning process, improving our collaboration through our chat tools, improving the code that we're generating more efficiently and pairing, enhancing and automating our documentation generation, and then how we're allocating team members to work on work. Every one of these real world examples, from my perspective, and throw something in the chat if anyone disagrees, but from my perspective, all of these real world examples of these tools being used today directly true back to what matters to us in both agile practices, but again, more importantly, agile principles and agile values. All of these things either improve the quality of what we do, they improve how we're communicating with other individuals, whether they're stakeholders, customers, fellow team members, folks outside of the team, whoever they are, they improve the communication and collaboration. They make more efficient certain things that we have to do, but don't necessarily want to do that aren't human interactions. All of these examples are real world ways to help us be more of what I call little a agile or adjective agile. They help us more in really agile principles and practices and being more agile, being able to be more adaptive and more collaborative. So there are some real world challenges. So again, I said, get everyone excited about generative AI. If you haven't used it a whole lot as of yet, I'm going to kill the vibe. Just kidding, but I want to be talking very thoughtfully with everyone as you contemplate using these tools, or if you've already started, these may be things that you're already aware of. If not, they're just things to be cognizant of. So I am absolutely an advocate of using these tools. It would be awkward if I was doing this live stream and wasn't. But I also, like with any powerful tool, you want to make sure that it's used properly and it's used the right way for the right reasons. And when it's not, bad things happen. So there's a couple of examples, and unfortunately, this is a very small subset of the examples of which I am even aware. New York City put a chatbot out there with the best of intentions to help small businesses. It was very thoughtful in helping them with guidance on how to break the law. There's a delivery service, DPD, their chatbot that they had for customers with the best of intentions. They rolled that out, and the response, I couldn't say it better than the user themselves who posted this to Twitter. In January, it's utterly useless at answering any queries, and when asked, it happily produced a poem about how terrible they are as a company, and it swore at me. We don't want to be in the news that way, and we don't want to be in Twitter that way. So these are things that when we look at using AI, we need to be careful. There's some other examples that some of you may be familiar with that are fairly recent. Google had an ad during the Olympics, and they had a huge backlash. From my perspective, for similar reasons as the new iPad ad that came out and was immediately removed based on negative feedback. Those were two instances where Google and Apple respectively rolled out these technologies, but the messaging and how the marketing was perceived by customers and the broader universe is that we're using these tools to replace the things that make us truly human, or that are activities or events or interactions that we want to remain human. The first one, the Google, if you're not familiar with the AI ad, it was using Gemini, a father asking Gemini to help his daughter write a fan letter to her favorite athlete. The idea of a father outsourcing that really special event with his daughter did not resonate well. The Apple ad was destroying a whole bunch of creative instruments of all different disciplines in the creative fields, and saying that the iPad would replace all of those. That did not go over super well with creatives and those who appreciate creativity alike. And then the last example, and this is where it becomes very challenging, is it's not a simple answer from my perspective. The issues that AI has with bias, and we'll talk about that briefly in just a moment, but Google had made some changes to address the observably true issues that all of these tools have with bias. They're based on data that's on the internet. That data is not awesome in many cases. There's a lot of bad things that are on the internet of which we're all aware. In Google's attempts to right that wrong with the best of intentions, they did things like adding diversity in areas where it was not historically accurate. The extreme one that was used as the example, and had Google make some immediate changes, and I think they actually pulled it down for a while until they were able to solve it, was that somebody had put in a way to test the system of checking for an image of a 1943 German soldier. And that's one of those areas that's an awful time in history. We want to be able to talk about the awful things in that time in history. And this is an area where this was obviously historically very inaccurate. So even attempting to solve some of the inherent problems with bias, there can be some issues where our approach to solve that makes the issue even either worse or at least differently bad. So those are things to be cognizant of. Relatedly, some other limitations and risks of AI. Again, very much an advocate. I wouldn't be doing this live stream if I didn't believe in the incredible useful power of these tools. But I really want to encourage everyone to be thoughtful about the limitations and risks. Some ethical concerns. So you saw some examples on the prior screen. But these models, again, they're trained on data that is available from the publicly available internet. Unfortunately, there's a lot of great things on the internet and a lot of awful things on the internet, and these models are trained based on all of that content. So the training data is always going to have biased information, and we're going to have to be cognizant and review the responses we get to make sure that the responses aren't biased, but also unethical. They're not always biased, but they may provide just really bad ideas. We want to really be thoughtful about those responses and be aware that unless we're careful with our prompts and our review of what comes out of these tools, we're going to have challenges. So we still need to be in charge as we use these tools. Relatedly, over automation. So there are some instances where folks are over relying on generative AI for a variety of things, software engineering tasks. Um, in that example, there can be a lack of human oversight and creativity in the development process. Again, it's all based on probability. And that being the case, you're going to get a commoditized answer, but are you going to get something that is truly creative? Probably not. So we really want to have that human generative AI hybrid there. We really want to look for optimization. We really want to add that human element. That's where all of you and your fellow team members all come in to help work collaboratively with these tools. And then again, limited validation. So I don't know how many are aware, it's not in one of the examples I have in the slides, but there was a lawyer who was sanctioned for using generative AI tools, and it generated case law that he provided to help with the pleadings for his case. And ChatGPT didn't say, I don't have this data. ChatGPT didn't say anything about what I'm about to tell you is wrong. It dutifully responded in response to the request from this individual with these case law examples. And it completely fabricated. The downside of generative AI is it's going to generate something. It may not be the right thing. In this example, where you need precision and specificity and accuracy, it completely fabricated case law. And this individual lost the case and was, I believe the lawyer was sanctioned and the petitioner was charged a fee because he used that fabricated case law in his case. So we really want to be thoughtful about the fact that we need to be in charge. Again, in all of these areas, the human beings need to be the ones that are in the charge. You need to lead that charge, to be in charge as advocates and leaders of using these tools, to make sure that we're validating they's responses so that they're effective and efficient and valuable. So that also includes not just accuracy, but quality, security, and functionality standards. It's not going to know your own company's security standards. It won't know anything that's specific about your organization in most cases. So you want to make sure that that's part of your process. And then what I've found, and this goes back to my time when I was first working with these tools over a decade ago, and this wasn't generative AI, but AI in general for a human emulation focused natural language processing chatbot. The phrase confident but wrong really came to be one that was oft repeated by me because there's not any humility, at least in the models that I'm aware of today, in any of these tools that simply says, I don't have enough information to give you the right response, or based on what I'm seeing in my data set, I'm not comfortable, or at least, hey, this specific answer is based on a finite amount of information. It doesn't have that the ability to really go deeply in terms of assessing the likelihood that that response is accurate. There's not any sort of humility baked into that or any sort of equivalent. So again, we need to be the ones who are in charge of making sure that those answers are accurate and that hit all of those other required notes that we have. So with that, some next steps in terms of moving forward with generative AI. It's just some suggestions I have. If you haven't started the journey or if you're early on, these are some things that you might want to consider. And we'll share out this material afterwards as well. And this live stream is being recorded. The first, though, is consider confidentiality and related for your organization and the information that you have. There is an option in ChatGPT to turn off chat history. It's pretty well hidden. But you can turn this off. But by default, ChatGPT uses your inputs to improve its model. And if you don't turn that off, anything that you put into ChatGPT will become part of its model. Even if that was not the case, you likely, if you're working in really almost any organization, you're going to have HIPAA healthcare related data in some cases, but a lot of PCI, so personal confidential information, credit card information, financial information, all of those different things, GDPR, uh, you know, California has specific laws related to privacy, et cetera. You're likely subject for the work that you and your team do to some level of compliance needs, both internal and regulatory, need to be thoughtful about including and sharing any of that data in one of these publicly available tools. So once we've gotten past that, though, here's some additional ideas as you move forward. We've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to walk through some ways. If you think about the examples that I provided, here's some things that you can use to start with those examples and amplify and improve upon them. So in all instances with these tools, we used to say garbage in, garbage out many, many decades ago. That idea is still the same case. To get the best outputs, provide good inputs, here's some things that you can do that are reliable to help improve the specificity, quality, accuracy, et cetera, of the answer. The first is specify your role or the role you wish to emulate. So if I'm an enterprise agile coach, I want to be specific about that. If I'm a consultant, I want to be specific about that. If I'm a new Scrum Master who just got my CSM, I'm going to need a different kind of support from these tools than somebody who is at like Marcos's level, who I'm going to keep calling on because I know Marcos. But Marcos, like if I was going to Marcos, I would ask things in a different way than if I was going to a new Scrum Master and vice versa. So we want to think about that role so that the response is tailored to my understanding as well as context. Relatedly, audience, so the role is about who I am. Well, who am I providing this for? So if I am generating a release report, if I'm doing that for the director of software engineering, or if I'm doing that for a project manager, or if I'm doing that for the executive team, um, the nature of that same content and how I would present it and communicate it would be very, very different in most cases. So specifying the audience gives me a lot of specificity in terms of the quality of the responses that I'm providing and really orienting the language, the tone, the format, everything towards that audience. And those are materially different. You don't want to confuse how you communicate with an executive team versus a fellow software engineer or agile coach. Relatedly, and you saw this in a couple of my examples, if you're addressing a problem, a gap, or opportunity, provide a summary of the situation. So I provided the example earlier about not only do I need help with a better retro, but I need help with making my retros better because people aren't speaking up. Its response, as you may recall, had a lot to do with priming the pump with the agenda, but also making sure that I had an environment of psychological safety. If my context had been that everyone was talking and we had too many good ideas, probably don't have an issue with psychological safety, but I have some other issues. So context is key. Format. So this is a superpower, and I learned this the hard way. I would get these outputs from ChatGPT initially, and then would dutifully format that into whatever tool I was using to deal with that output. And then very quickly learned I could just say, give it to me in a table, give it to me in a PowerPoint friendly outline, give it to me in CSV. It will dutifully create this for you. I do a lot of work where I like to present information in tables and others in outline form. And it dutifully will do that with whatever I ask it to do. And then related to that, length doesn't always work in terms of explicit numeric constraints, but you can say around 100 words. Often when it comes back, it's super verbose, like me. And so I will ask it in many cases, cut this down by about half, and it will dutifully summarize and make more succinct its responses. So be specific about the length, because again, if I'm communicating with a set of executives, they usually don't want to have excessively verbose information. But if I'm working with a software engineer and I'm providing some information, they often like to have a lot of depth of information there. So being able to provide that also helps with the audience and with the context. Relatedly, think in terms of roles in your inputs. So when I'm interacting with these tools, this is a really good place for me, at least, to start. Do I want it to have this researcher hat? Do I need an expert opinion on a given topic? If it's something that I'm new to, if I want to go race cars and I've never done that before, where would I start? So do I want an expert opinion on a given topic? That's a place to start. For me, I find a lot of value as a writer. Do I need help summarizing, detailing, refining a written artifact? I do a lot of writing for a living, but I find this is a really great place to help me with things that I've written, improve them, but also to help me with first drafts. I do a lot of alternating back and forth. And then creators. So you saw in some of the examples, give me some ideas to get started with something. And it can be helpful there. Again, creativity in terms of these tools, something truly novel. I would say that in most cases, those aren't super useful to me. But if I want some ideas to get started, I will usually say, give me 20 if I'm looking for 5, and then I choose the 5 from the 20 that I think are useful. So that may be useful for you, but it really can work to help when I've got writer's block or some equivalent, when I want just some ideas to get started because I've got too much going on in my head. It's really helpful in that way. And so if it's an expert opinion I am looking for, I can ask questions to gain perspective. Again, back to making sure that I provide the level of audience for which I want a response. If I'm solving problems or trying to solve problems, again, I provide the context and those scenarios. The more data, like that JIRA data that I provided as an example, is really powerful. And you'll get some potential solutions. The more data you provide, the more targeted and likely useful the solution ideas are for you. Drafting or refining written content, as mentioned, I will take my existing artifacts and I will push them through even as PDFs, and I'll put as much information as possible and say, take this Word document and regenerate the salient points for the executive audience. It's actually really useful for me to refine written content, but also to do it for different audiences, update the same information. And so again, if you're using it in either or both of those instances, just be specific about who you're developing that for. And it will help based on that persona, so to speak. So we're about out of time. Closing recommendations based on all of that. If you're not sure where to start with a real world challenge, look to your last retro. I always just say, I'm sure you found some things in your retro that you may not know how to get started with or don't know how to do it most effectively. Provide your context and use that as your first scenario to start using these tools and see what it comes up with. Experiment, experiment, experiment. So it's not a browser, and we need to remember that. We want to have that conversation. We want to, in that conversation, have variations based on audience, persona, role, everything that we talked about earlier, format. There's in the ChatGPT store, if you use ChatGPT, the paid version, there's ChatGPT for Agilists made by LitheSpeed. That can give you some really targeted, curated guidance. Relatedly, though, if you're only using ChatGPT or if you're only using any of the singular tools, try some other ones. Do a taste test, your Pepsi Coke challenge, and see which ones work best for you. I've tried Claude a lot. I like it for a lot of things. There's a couple of things that I think ChatGPT is just 4.0, but even earlier was better. And then just continue learning. Things are happening so quickly in this space. I'm trying to keep up, and I do this as one of my core aspects of my day job. There's different ways that aggregate this, different news sources, excuse me, that will aggregate this information, but the pace is just incredible. So try to keep up as much as possible, but also consider additional training, including certified and instructor-led, and then leverage curated resources. LitheSpeed's got the Agile VMO Copilot, but there's a number of other resources out there. But because there is so much that's happening, there really can be some challenges in terms of knowing which resources to work with.